The year was 1865, and the frontier lay beneath a pale morning sun that seemed too gentle for a land so often torn by violence. Dust drifted like smoke across the empty main street of Redemption Ridge, stirred only by the faint breeze that carried the scent of horse sweat, cracked leather, and old sins. Men leaned against wooden posts, hats low, hands near their belts, not out of boredom, but habit. This was a place where each sunrise might also be someone's last. And on that morning, the town felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting for the sort of trouble no one wanted to name aloud. Evelyn Hale stepped out from the shadowed doorway of the tailor's shop, her hands trembling as she clutched a small bundle to her chest. The fabric wrapped around, it was worn thin, the kind a person saved only because it held meaning beyond thread and dye. Her eyes darted up and down the street, searching for any sign of him. The color had drained from her face, but her jaw was set with a resolve sharpened by too many nights spent listening to her own heartbeat racing in the darkness. Bruises, faint but undeniable, traced her forearm. She tugged her sleeve lower, as if hiding them might erase their cause. The sharp creak of a saloon door made her flinch. A man stepped out, glanced at her, then quickly looked away. That was the way of Redemption Ridge. Everyone saw, everyone knew, but no one dared intervene. Not when the matter concerned Silas Colt. Evelyn swallowed hard, the dryness in her throat scraping like sandpaper. The chill of the morning did little to calm her racing pulse. She had one chance, one breath's worth of courage, before fear reclaimed her. She whispered to herself, "Run now or die here," and felt something inside her shift. Not break, not yet, but bend in a way that warned her she would never recover if she stayed. A long shadow spilled across the street from the direction of the sheriff's office, and the hairs on Evelyn's arms rose. She knew that stance, that stride. She did not need to see his face to know Silas Colt had arrived. His presence carried a weight that pressed against the lungs of anyone nearby. Men stiffened. Women drifted backward into doorways. Even the horses tied along the hitching posts pawed and snorted nervously. Silas emerged fully into view, bare-chested despite the cold, muscles carved like stone, his frame towering above the onlookers. A dark leather hat cast a shadow over his eyes, but they gleamed beneath the brim with the icy focus of a predator who knew no one could challenge him. The scars across his shoulders told the story of a life spent fighting, surviving, conquering. To Silas, people were not companions or neighbors. They were possessions, and Evelyn, in his mind, was the one possession he never intended to lose. He scanned the street with the ease of a man accustomed to owning it. His gaze swept past Evelyn, then snapped back, narrowing with recognition. She stepped backward, her fingers tightening on the bundle until her knuckles whitened. There was no more time for planning or praying. Instinct seized her legs and hurled her into motion. She bolted down the center of the street, kicking up dust that clung to the hem of her dress. Gasps erupted from the townsfolk. A few men shouted warnings, though none dared physically stand in her way. Her breath roared in her ears. Every heartbeat felt like a hammer striking against her ribs. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The moment she saw how close he was, she knew her courage would crumble. Silas strode toward his horse, a towering dark stallion that matched his fury in both size and temperament. With movements fluid and practiced, he swung into the saddle in a single, powerful motion. The reins snapped. The stallion surged forward, hooves slamming against the earth with thunderous force. Dust erupted behind him like a storm, swallowing the street in a swirling haze. Evelyn darted between townspeople, her chest burning. She tripped once, stumbled, and caught herself on a barrel outside the general store. Her lungs screamed. Her legs trembled. She pushed harder, driven by terror and the faint spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could outrun him long enough to reach the tree line beyond the outskirts. But Silas was closing the distance with terrifying speed. The stallion barreled down the street, scattering chickens, knocking over a water bucket, and driving people against walls as they scrambled out of its path. The ground trembled beneath Evelyn's feet. She dared a glance over her shoulder, and her soul nearly collapsed. Silas loomed behind her, towering atop the horse, jaw clenched in cold rage, rope already coiled in one hand. She veered to the right, sprinting toward the alley between the hotel and the feed store. But she was too slow. The rope whistled through the air, with a harsh snap that cut through the chaos like a gunshot. The loop caught her wrist. Pain shot through her arm, white-hot and blinding. She screamed as she was yanked backward, feet skidding through the dirt. She collided with the ground hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs. The world spun, dust rising around her in choking waves as the stallion dragged her several feet before Silas jerked the reins, halting its momentum. The townsfolk froze in horror. A few took hesitant steps forward, but Silas turned his glare upon them. One look was enough to send them retreating. No one dared intervene. No one dared risk their life for a woman already marked by him. Evelyn clawed at the rope, fingers trembling uncontrollably. Her wrist throbbed in time with her frantic heartbeat. She twisted, writhed, fought to free herself. Silas dismounted slowly, boots crunching on the gravel as he approached her. "You should have known better," he growled, the words low and venomous. "No one runs for me." His grip closed around the rope, tightening it, drawing her closer. Evelyn's breath caught. Fear clawed its way through her chest. But something else flickered there as well, anger, faint yet fierce. A spark that refused to die. The street was silent except for the rattling of a loose shutter in the wind. People watched from windows and porches, trapped between guilt and cowardice. No one dared move. No one dared speak. Evelyn forced herself onto her knees, pain radiating up her arm. She lifted her eyes to meet Silas's, and for the first time in months, she did not look away. Silas paused, momentarily thrown off by the defiance in her gaze. It wasn't enough to save her, but it was enough to change everything about what would come next. The sun hung low over the frontier, its orange glow washing across the dusty sweep of the valley as though trying to set the harsh land aflame. Heat rolled off the earth in wavering sheets, but the wind carried a strange bite, a warning that the night would come colder than any man expected. It was on that uneasy wind that Colt Harrow rode into the settlement of Breakwater Ridge, the horse beneath him weary, its dark coat mottled with travel dust. Colt tipped back his hat as he crossed between the first scatter of cabins, his sharp eyes taking in the town with a quiet calculation that came from years of being forced to read danger before danger read him. He was younger than the stories claimed, though the grit carved into his features had aged him faster than time alone could. Beneath that hardened exterior, however, lay something restless, something searching. It was that unspoken burden that guided his every move, even when he wished it wouldn't. At the far end of the road, the saloon doors swung open, spilling laughter and the brittle pluck of a piano into the dusty evening. The sound did not soften the town's mood. Rather, it seemed to mock it. Folks of Breakwater Ridge had long learned that good music didn't mean good news. From the saloon's shadowed doorway stepped Lydia Vale, the woman whose name had grown almost as legendary as Colt's, though for very different reasons. She moved with a calm command, her long coat whispering around her legs, her hand never straying far from the pistol strapped against her hip. She carried herself like someone who had won battles she never wanted and lost things she could no longer bear to name. When she caught sight of Colt riding in, something flickered in her expression, not surprise, not fear, but the thin tightening of someone bracing for fate to take another swing. Colt dismounted, leading his horse to the trough as Lydia approached with measured steps. He could feel eyes on him from windows and doorways alike, whispering about the gunfighter with the past no one could quite piece together. Most knew only fragments. The burned homestead, the betrayal, the years spent hunting a ghost of a man who vanished into the desert. Lydia knew more, enough that her voice carried a weight when she finally spoke. "You picked a hell of a time to return, Colt," she said, her tone steady, but her gaze sharp. "I didn't come back for comfort," he replied, brushing dust from his coat. "Word reached me that Breakwater Ridge wasn't safe anymore." "It never was," Lydia said, "but things have taken a darker turn. There've been sightings out near the canyon. Men disappearing. livestock slaughtered in ways that don't make sense. She paused before adding, "Some say it's him." Colt's jaw tightened. The mere suggestion curled something cold around his spine. He had chased the man known only as Mercer Kane across half the frontier, an outlaw whose crimes were whispered like curses, whose cruelty left scars not just on people but on entire towns. Mercer was cunning, patient, and always seemed 2 steps ahead. Colt had nearly caught him once, but almost had proven a dangerous word. "Rumors," Colt muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Lydia admitted, "but the tracks out by the ridge, they're fresh. And they match the kind of raids Kane used to run." The wind shifted, carrying with it the crack of distant hammering from a blacksmith shop and a nervous murmur from townsfolk who lingered too long outside. Breakwater Ridge was more crowded than Colt remembered, yet it felt emptier somehow, hollowed out by fear that had seeped into the soil. Lydia lowered her voice. "There's more," she said. "Sheriff Alden is missing. Rode out 2 nights ago with 3 deputies. None returned. Folks are scared stiff, but they won't say it out loud. Some think the town's been marked." Colt nodded slowly, swallowing the weight of her words. Breakwater Ridge had once been his refuge, if only for a season. The people here had offered him something close to peace before the smoke of vengeance pulled him back onto the trail. Now, the town stood balanced on the edge of something dangerous, and though he had no right to claim responsibility for its fate, he felt the pull all the same. Lydia studied him, reading the conflict in his eyes. "I didn't send word to drag you into another fight, Colt. But if Mercer Kane is truly circling this town, then we don't have the luxury of hoping he'll move on." Colt exhaled slowly. "No," he said, "we don't." A silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant clang of metal and the uneasy shuffling of townsfolk. Colt felt memories rising, old fires reflected in the eyes of the man he loathed, the sound of gunfire cracking the night, the ruin left behind. He forced the images down, focusing instead on the woman before him. Lydia had stood at his side in the worst of it once, and she bore her own scars for doing so. "Where do we start?" Colt asked. Lydia motioned toward the saloon. "Inside. There's someone you need to meet." He claims to have seen Kane himself. As they stepped through the swinging doors, the room fell into an uneasy hush. The piano player paused mid-note, then resumed with a nervous tremor. Smoky lamplight flickered across worn tables and wary faces. Lydia led Colt to a booth in the corner where a thin, hollow-eyed ranch hand sat gripping a tin cup with trembling fingers. "This is Bram Fletcher," Lydia said softly. "Tell him what you told me." Bram swallowed hard, eyes darting around the room. "I was out near Devil's Hook Canyon," he began, voice cracking. "Saw a campfire, figured maybe a drifter. But when I got closer, Lord help me, I saw him. The scar across his cheek, the way his eyes shone in the firelight. It was Kane. I know it was." Colt leaned forward, expression carved in stone. "Did he see you?" Bram nodded, trembling harder. He smiled, like he'd been waiting for someone to notice, like he wanted the whole damn frontier to know he's back. The tension thickened. Colt exchanged a look with Lydia, one of grim understanding. Mercer Kane had never been the type to hide for long. If he was near Breakwater Ridge, it was not by accident. It was strategy. Colt rose slowly, placing his hat back atop his head. "Then we're out of time," he said. "If Kane means to strike this town, he won't wait for us to prepare." Lydia stood beside him, resting her hand on her revolver. "Then we ride at dawn." Colt nodded. "At dawn." And though the night's chill crept in, carrying a sense of foreboding, there was a spark in Colt Harrow's eyes, one born not of fear, but of purpose, igniting once more the fire he had tried so hard to bury. The dawn rose blood-red over Breakwater Ridge, spilling its harsh light across the cracked earth and the silent rooftops as if warning the town of the reckoning to come. Colt Harrow stood at the edge of the main road, reins in hand, his breath fogging faintly in the cold morning air. Lydia sat astride her mare beside him, her sharp gaze fixed on the horizon where the canyon cut through the land like a wound that never healed. The chill snapping at their coats felt wrong, too biting for the season, as though the air itself recoiled from what lay ahead. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The night had told them enough. Footsteps outside windows, shadows moving where no men should be, a silence too heavy to be natural. Mercer Kane was no longer stalking the edges. He had come closer. Colt swung into the saddle, the leather groaning under his weight. He felt the familiar burn in his chest, that mix of anger and dread that had haunted him ever since he'd first taken the trail after Kane. Lydia watched him with a steady expression, though he caught the flicker of concern in her eyes. She knew how deep his wounds ran, deeper than the scars across his skin, deeper even than the memory of his family's ruin. She also knew what drove him forward. Vengeance, responsibility, fear of what he would become if he failed again. Without a word, she clicked her tongue, urging her mare into motion. Colt followed, the two of them cutting through the thinning mist as the town shrank behind them. The ride to Devil's Hook Canyon took them across miles of barren land, gray rock rising in jagged walls that cast long shadows across the valley floor. Colt's senses sharpened with every passing moment, each hoof beat drumming against the hardened earth like a warning. He scanned the ridges, searching for movement, smoke, tracks, anything, but the canyon offered nothing but silence, the kind that swallowed sound and spit back unease. Lydia slowed as they approached a narrow pass where wind moaned through fissures in the stone. Colt raised a hand, signaling her to halt. Something was wrong. The stallion beneath him shifted, ears twitching toward a cluster of boulders ahead. Colt dismounted slowly, boots crunching softly on gravel. Lydia followed suit, drawing her revolver as she crouched, studying the ground. Tracks fresh ones. A dozen men or more. Colt kneeled beside them, brushing dust away with careful fingers. Heavy prints, some dragging, some light, as though men had been running. The air tasted metallic, a sign he'd learned never to ignore. He rose, meeting Lydia's eyes. They were here, and not long ago. She nodded, jaw tightening. Colt stepped forward, but the faintest echo stopped him. A hollow clatter, followed by another. Not wind, not rockfall. Metal. Lydia raised her gun, breath steady but tense. Colt motioned for silence and edged toward the canyon wall. The sound grew louder, boots striking stone. A voice barked a command. Then a figure appeared on the ridge above. Mercer Kane. He stood tall and lean, coat snapping in the wind, the sun catching the jagged scar running from his cheek to his jaw. His eyes cold and gleaming, locked onto Colt with the familiarity of an old enemy savoring the moment. A slow smile crept across his face, cruel and hollow. "Harrow," he called, voice echoing off the rock. "I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve." Lydia stiffened, weapon raised. Colt didn't answer. He stepped forward, gaze never leaving Kane. More figures emerged behind the outlaw, armed men, rifles glinting. A dozen, maybe more. Colt's pulse hammered, but he kept his voice level. "You've been hunting this town," he said. "Why?" Kane chuckled, the sound scraping down the canyon walls. "Because fear makes men stupid, and stupid men are easy to break." His smile widened. "But you know that better than most." Colt felt the old rage flare like fire in dry grass, but he held it back. Lydia shifted, whispering, "We're outnumbered." Colt nodded imperceptibly. Kane raised a hand. "Enough talk." He snapped his fingers. The gunmen raised their rifles. Colt lunged toward Lydia, shouting for cover as the canyon erupted in gunfire. Bullets tore into stone, sending shards flying. Colt pulled Lydia behind a jutting wall of rock, just as a shot grazed his arm. He grunted but stayed focused. Dust billowed. Echoes boomed. The canyon became a thunderous cage of violence. Lydia fired back, her shot sharp and precise, forcing Kane's men to scatter. Colt drew his revolver, breath steady despite the chaos. He leaned out, fired twice, struck a rifle from a gunman's hands, then ducked back as bullets shredded the rock above him. The enemy pressed closer, their shadows shifting across the canyon floor. Colt knew they couldn't hold position long. He scanned the ridge and spotted a narrow path winding upward. If they reached higher ground, they could break the ambush. He touched Lydia's shoulder. "There," he said. "Move on my mark." She nodded, blood streaking her forehead from a grazing strike. Colt waited for the split-second lull between volleys, then charged. They sprinted from cover, boots pounding against the stone. Shots whistled past, ricocheting dangerously close. Lydia stumbled, but Colt caught her arm, hauling her forward until they reached the base of the ridge. They climbed fast, fingers gripping jagged rock, muscles burning. A shout rose behind them. Kane's men gave chase. Colt reached the top first, spinning to pull Lydia over the edge. As her boots cleared the ledge, a figure appeared below, rifle aimed upward. Colt fired before the man could pull the trigger. The outlaw fell, crashing against rock. Lydia rose beside Colt, chest heaving, and together they pressed on. At the ridge's peak, they found Kane waiting. He stood alone now, hands empty, expression calm. Colt stopped several paces away, revolver trained on him. Kane tilted his head. "Kill me, and you'll never outrun what it makes you." Colt tightened his grip. "I already know what it makes me." Kane smiled faintly. "Then do it." Lydia whispered, "Colt," but the words were drowned by the thunder of hooves. A second wave of gunmen appeared on the far ridge. Colt realized the trap had only begun. Kane stepped back, fading into the dust as reinforcements advanced. Colt fired, shouting for Lydia to run. The world erupted once more, louder, closer, deadlier. Colt felt the canyon spin around him, felt the heat of gunfire, felt the tremor of the earth. And then everything went still. Not silent, not safe, but still enough for him to understand one brutal truth. The fight for Breakwater Ridge had only just begun.